Hello, I'm Yang coming to you live from Beijing. China's revised traffic regulations stirred national debate before going into effect last Tuesday. They are believed to be the most stringent traffic regulations to have been introduced in the country ever. The Ministry of Public Security says the amended laws are intended to create a civilized driving environment. But netizens argue that yellow lights lose their meaning as a warning to drivers if jumping a yellow light is punishable in the same way as jumping a red light. So how are China's drivers reacting to these harsher penalties? Will the new regulations help improve the driving experience on China's roads? Today, we are happy to be joined here in the Beijing studio by Mr. Gregory Zhang, current affairs commentator, and Mr. Anna Tangen, Biz Times columnist. We'll also talk to Professor Takasato Watanabe from Doshita University, Kyoto, on the phone to hear about Japan's experience with enforcing traffic rules. But before we start the interview, let's look at this.
China's new traffic law is considered to be the strictest ever. Now, even minor offenses can lead to a stiff penalty, including the immediate confiscation of your driver's license. Running a red or yellow light means 6 points deducted from your license. That's half of the 12-point limit. It used to be only 3 points for the same offense. An unfastened seatbelt, 2 points. Speeding, 6 points. Obscuring a license plate, 12 points. And when you lose all 12 points, you have to retake the license test before you can get back behind the wheel. Well, it might be true that this new traffic law is going too far. For many offenses, you won't even have a second chance before they take away your driving license. But lawmakers say there is no second chance when a seemingly minor offense is causing deadly traffic accidents. Across China, more than 60,000 people die in car crashes each year. That means every 10 minutes, one person gets killed on the road. The so-called minor violations, such as running red lights or speeding, are the top killers. The government hopes the strict penalties will help deter violations and make China's roads safer. But many people say what's really needed is genuine public awareness of traffic safety. Han Peng, CCTV, Beijing.
Welcome back. Look at those brutal pictures in the background footage. Now, what do you think of the outrage online from the angry drivers that running a yellow light is considered equivalent to running a red light? I mean, there's no meaning at all, as I said earlier in the opening remarks. What do you think of the heavier penalties?
I think they have a reason to be angry. To qualify me as a discussion of this topic, I have 40 years plus experience driving in the United States, also some experience in China. I believe if there's a yellow light existing in the state started 1920, almost 100 years now, it has a reason. It means only two things. One is to slow down, caution. You can stop your car safely, do it. If not, go through the intersection in ample time, because always 2 or 5 seconds to do that. So this decision making by the government is hasty. It is not reasonable. It cannot be enforced. Something has to be done to change it before it's too late.
Anna, do you defend the government in China, or do you see eye to eye with Anna? Gregory?
I'm going to have to disagree with my learned colleague here. I have 36 years driving experience, not quite 40. But I can tell you, with 62,000 deaths, with 20 million cars being added, with the average experience of Chinese drivers only being 3 years or less, this is a big problem. I think the government is trying to get people's attention. In the past, they have talked about stiffer regulations and licensing and penalties. But there's just not enough enforcement out there. You have to start somewhere, and I think the government is sending a wake-up call to people.
Let's cross over to Professor Watanabe from Doshita University for the Japanese perspective on running a yellow light. Hello.
Thank you for your call.
Professor Watanabe, why aren't there any penalties at all for those who run a yellow light in your country?
In Japan, our auto society has started 50 years ago, and in the beginning, we had a very serious problem. The drivers did not stop just before the red light, and yellow light meaning was very important. However, the education in the traffic, you see, at the elementary level, it has educated Japanese people enough, and also the many victims which were caused by that, you see, violent driver, you see, gave us very serious social problems. And cars in the beginning of the 70s and 80s of the 20th century, the cars were called running coffins. It means that, you see, the cars are killing the people and also drivers themselves. And now, you see, this year, the latest statistics shows that the amount of the victims became very, very small, and the same number of the 50 years ago. This means education is very important, and also societal, you see, quality improvement of the moral standard.
Yes, indeed. We have a lot to learn from our neighboring country of Japan in terms of how to follow the rules. Now, don't you think, Anna, having lived in China for years, you got the impression that the Chinese drivers tend to ignore the traffic rules, and that is very dangerous. That requires tough regulations to be imposed upon them.
Absolutely. I mean, when you see the pictures that we just saw, and you realize what it means when 62,000 people are killed, that does not include the millions who lose work, time, money because of these traffic accidents. These has an enormous impact on society. There has to be a starting point. It's fine to say that we can, you know, in Japan's case, they 50 years on, they've gotten through driver's education. China is still very young in its automobile culture, and as I said, with less than 3 years of experience, there has to be some way of making people realize that this is very serious. Actually, if you talk to pedestrians, all right, people who are not using cars, they're saying this is great. It's about time that the government, now the vast majority of people in China do not have cars. The car culture is growing, the education will grow, but it is the duty of the government to make sure and protect the people.
And in fact, one message posted on Weibo, the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, complained that he might be the very first victim of the new regulations, saying that he slammed into a car in front of him because that driver in front of him slammed the brakes right after the yellow lights appeared. So that means most of the drivers will be likely to be caught unprepared.
I agree with Einar that something has to be done in China to improve traffic safety, so we will not have 22,000 people killed because of reckless driving. 62,000 killed as such. However, the approach should be in different directions. For example, this professor from Japan mentioned earlier, let's start with driving schools. Hopefully, when they learn to drive, pay the excessive fee of 4,000 or 5,000 RMB to get this training accomplished. They should be given the information why they should stop safely the yellow light, and then this is for their own good. It's not so much to be afraid of getting caught or 6 points deducted, because to save lives and property, this is the proper thing to do. And also, they should enhance the overall tendency of abiding by the law. Again, I think China is anxious to improve its traffic safety, but by making this rule all of a sudden, without considering the practice in other countries, I think is a mistake. I still believe something has to be done, but not in this particular fashion. For example, given an example, if a car afraid of going through the line being punished and stop suddenly, and the other car following that car has no time to stop, so this type of accident will happen
that
in the
I
future.
Completely disagree with. First off, a car is a dangerous, it's like having a gun in your hand. You can run people over. You're supposed to be in control of that vehicle at all times. This is an international standard. There is no excuse for running into behind. What if that person were stopping for something that you could not see? A child or an animal that was in the road. Are you going to say, oh, well, you know, he shouldn't have stopped? No, the laws are there. You have to be in control of that vehicle or you should not be driving it. So I don't really have a lot of sympathy for the guy who slammed into the back end of a taxi cab.
Let me mention this. If you're the driver on the street yourself, and you are only like 3-5 feet away from this intersection line, and the yellow light is right there, yellow light changed, could you stop at all? There was a complaint talking about the Newton's law of constancy. So
Newton's first law.
I agree.
Inertia.
You cannot stop. In the States, for example, the yellow light serves two very important purposes. Number one, if you are approaching the intersection line, you have time to go through the intersection in 2 to 5 seconds. Do it. The others in distance would say the red light is coming, so they slow down. So by the time they get to the line, they can stop. It is not designed, not at all, to say stop right there.
Wait a minute. I've been a driver for over
Many
one
years.
decade, and in our training class, the teacher said you are required to slow down before the intersection. I mean, at the same time, you have to keep a distance from the car right in front of you.
True.
That gives you enough time to react to the yellow light. Anna.
Absolutely. You're supposed to be at least 2 car lengths back. You should not be pushing up against the other car. That is inherently dangerous. What if it was a child there? What would your reaction be to that? The fact is that China has it's early on in its car culture. It has to move things along, and safety is paramount. 62,000 people. Those are mothers, grandmothers, children, all right? The impact on society when somebody who's supporting the family is killed is, you can't.
Now,
What
do you think of the official statement from the Public Security Bureau at different levels of the country that the heavier penalties are intended to create a more civilized driving environment? What do you think of the wording "more civilized driving environment" compared to the United States?
Of course, it says that it's not civilized enough to prevent this type of accident to happen from time to time. But again, if the idea is to decrease traffic accidents, how about enforcing the rule not run red light? For example, this time, if yellow light is treated the same as red light, how come we didn't do enough in the past to enforce not running through red light? So having a yellow light has additional function to play, and that function is crucial. You cannot treat the same.
But there are limited resources involved here. If you want to put a policeman at every single intersection to prevent these types of things, think of the enormous amount of resources that you'd be wasting. The government can only do so much. What they're doing is putting very stiff penalties out there to remind people that it's their duty to drive safely. And I think you can't, yes, will this law be refined? Absolutely. But I think it's a good first step to get people in line with the idea that safety is very, very important.
There's a great difference in good intentions and enforceable and good practice and good results. This is one good example, because you cannot set up this rule and ask people to follow when it is against international practices. I think you should train drivers from the very beginning for your own safety, for your own good. You should drive slowly. You should not follow the other car very closely. For example, in the United States, if the speed is 40 miles per hour, you're supposed to have 4 car lengths. So that's the guideline. But in China, when you come too close to the car in front of you, it's always good, as you just mentioned, companies like you to slow down anyhow and make a turn, go ahead. So it is for your own good. It's not so much because getting caught out, point deducted. So the Chinese should learn how to obey rules and learn how to practice for their own sake, not because someone else.
Okay, but
China will be considered an adversary unless and until China follows the rules. That's what President Obama said in his presidential debate. You're watching a debate here in the Beijing studio, where we are joined by Mr. Gregory Zhang and Mr. Anna Tangen. We're discussing the imposition of a new draconian traffic regulation about how to look at the yellow light in China. We'll be back in a few minutes.
I think the revision is not bad. It's safer for pedestrians and non-motor vehicles if cars and other motor vehicles have to stop at a yellow light.
It's really difficult for taxi drivers to follow the new rule. If buses or trucks are in front of us, we can't see the traffic lights. If they cross an intersection on a green light, which then suddenly turns yellow as we are crossing, that's 6 points just gone.
If you brake suddenly, it's more like the car behind will go into the back of you, so you have to rush through a yellow light.
The new regulations are beneficial to traffic conditions and safety, because students must go through a more thorough training process. They have to understand traffic regulations and how to drive safely before getting a license.
It's not possible for a driver to stop in accordance with the new traffic signal rule. Due to considerations of safety, we'll assess the situation based on the circumstances of the case.
Welcome back, gentlemen. Do you think drivers have overreacted to the new and allegedly draconian regulations about running a yellow light? Are you sympathetic with the drivers who say, look, in China, this is part of a national condition. People are known for ignoring traffic rules. Therefore, if they drive in a big crowd, if they walk in a big crowd as jaywalkers, they should be forgiven?
Oh. Absolutely. I mean, that's why there's so many deaths out there. The fact is that you have to move forward with this, and there has to be some. Will this law be changed? Will it be modified? I think the answer is clearly yes. But I think the government's trying to get attention.
Yeah, let's go back to the roots of the problem. For example, the driving schools in China is notorious. They do not train the learners with respect, because I spoke to quite a few of them. They complain a lot, they charge a heavy fee. At the time they are going through this road test, a list will be given to the examiners to say these are the ones from our school, so they're all paid for, something like that. If you have those people learning from those type of schools to begin with, they are rotten to start. So sometimes some of them getting the license without going through the road tests. So that's a part of the reason. So I do believe by enforcing the law, in this case, have run through yellow light, treat as red light, is no solution at all. It would add to more problems.
Thank you very much. We have to leave you there for the moment. Let's cross over to Professor Watanabe for his comments on our national condition here, which I'm afraid is not something that we should be proud of. Hello, Professor Watanabe.
Thank you. Thank you. My idea is, you see, just we experienced 20 years ago, we had the same problem about the yellow light. Yellow light means to prepare to stop short of the intersection if it is safe to do so. However, drivers did not understand that, and there was a conflict between drivers and police officers. So, Japanese police side decided to give the green winkling light before the yellow light. And it continued for 10 years or so. Then drivers learned how to stop before the green light through the yellow signals. And then we stopped that system. Now we have, you see, overcome this problem. The serious problem in Japan in the traffic accident is the young, violent drivers and drunken drivers. And more than half of the victims of the traffic accidents are senior people who are over 65 years old. So I support your government decision to give the penalty to the violation of the yellow light. Then in a decade or so, Chinese, you see, who are very clever, they can learn how to observe the traffic light, not to have the traffic accident.
This is obviously part of a campaign to rule the country by law instead of ruling the country by man. We are not prepared to have the emerging auto society, and that means a lot. On the one hand, you need to educate people about the ethics, about the safety, and about the driving skills. But this time around, it's about life or death, break or make or break. Education. Now, you argue at the very beginning that education is so important. It's better than imposing draconian laws. Anna Tangen, what do you think?
Education is absolutely important, but if you were to see what it takes to get a driver's license in the United States, I think you would take back this idea. It is very cursory. You answer 10 or 12 questions, in some cases multiple choice depending on the state. And then you go out and you're supposed to drive around a circle. You're supposed to back up, not hit too many cones, and then they let you have a driver's license. There, the driver's license is 16. Most of our, quite a large percentage of fatalities are young people. They involve young people and generally some drugs or alcohol.
Drugs too.
Drugs and alcohol. And it's a situation where, yes, you do need the education, but when you're starting off in a society, you have to start someplace. How do you get people's attention? All right, the truth is, yellow light, as far as I could see, prior to this, meant speed up, okay? So people were dashing into the intersections when they saw the yellow light to try to get across. And the government is reacting to it. Saying
Excuse me, gentlemen, we
that.
have to jump onto other topics related to social governance. Now, at the beginning of the year 2013, I believe the Chinese leadership is well prepared for introducing a novel idea of a good governance instead of a democracy. Forgive me for saying so. But do you think this is a part of the general campaign to improve governance of the society by not only imposing very harsh regulations on drivers, but also talking about having real name registrations for net users? Now, do you think this is a good, for example, for those who want to be involved in the anti-corruption campaign? Because if they use the real names, they'll be exposed to the corrupt government officials.
I think the new leadership coming into positions this year is trying to change the climate. So China would have a new push to get things better in all directions, including the traffic safety improvement. Or we mentioned the real name registration for citizen, for netizens and so on. But again, it's crucial to understand that you have to have a comprehensive approach, a package. We have, for example, traffic education. We tighten up, make sure those people getting a driver's license earn them. They're not getting them through illegal means. We have the rules set up reasonable to be enforced, and have education to come through so people understand why they have to do this for themselves. So all these things combined would make things change to a different direction. So I admire the government, for example, tighten up the rules for drunken driving. That's important. So in improve the traffic safety, you need the whole approach to apply, including rules to be followed, education to be added, and plus self-discipline, and so on and so forth.
In terms of the other part of your question, when you start talking about real name registration, I do think that can have a very chilling effect on issues. Whether this
freedom of speech, for example.
Yes, but freedom of speech
because the Western media quickly jumped on that topic. But freedom instead of talking about the possible violations of people's privacy, because that's the focal point of the current campaign against using the pseudonym.
I know, but freedom of speech is a two-edged sword. People anonymously posting vicious attacks against people is equally wrong. And if you how do you err? All right, do you err on the side of people who are being attacked or maligned or malicious threats or cyber stalkers? Or do you say, okay, we're going to open it up? There are different ways that the government can do that. There can be anonymous tip lines that can be sent in to police stations, to government officials who can respond to them. The internet is not the only way. It has been the most popularized way up now. But I think overall, the direction here is very interesting. You're starting to see some real movement in different areas, both on the social things from cars and the rule of law there, but also in other directions. So wait and see.
Let me add something to that. I think it's crucial to have this interaction, providing information on website and so on for the reference of the government to look into. We should encourage that, because not until the so-called freedom of speech is strongly present in China. So magazines, newspapers, televisions will give them a platform to voice opinions. This particular platform should be there. The question is how to regulate it. As Edgar said, you cannot put false information to hurt someone else, but you cannot say this is not a good approach. It is a good one, particularly fighting corruption, I think.
Professor Watanabe is on the line. Hello.
Hello, yes.
What do you think of the act by the Chinese authorities to require real name registration if you want to be an online player? What do you think of similarities in other countries in East Asia? What about the situation in Japan?
In Japan, we have the very serious problems of the anonymity or the real names. And social network, so-called, which requires the real names network is necessary, and also younger people want to join that kind of network. So anonymity is sometimes good to criticize the powerful person or the government, but actually the people want to exchange the ideas, frank views, using the real names. If we can do like that, we can speak freely, honestly, and we can make the transparent society. So freedom of expression using the real name is very important. it is considered like this in Japan now.
Thank you very much, Professor Watanabe, for joining us. Welcome back. What do you think of public hearings before a new regulation or legislation is formulated here in China? Because we are quite familiar with televised congressional hearings in the U.S. Do you think this is something that we should learn?
I think, as I understand that the city of Beijing has done something like that in the past. So it depends on the regulation or the rules to be developed, whether it's a serious problem, is something important. For example, you cannot take on every minor issues to open up for public hearing. So if, for example, the netizens have expressed strongly in their communication on television, on the computer, saying that something is important, for example, fighting corruption or the VIPs to reveal the property, the holdings before they get on a different position. When there is a strong voice coming from the public, from the netizens, something has to be done, something about, then we need the input of those people plus experts. I think that's the case.
I agree that public hearings are good. I've presided over public hearings and testified on, both on Capitol Hill and at the state level. I think they're wonderful, but there's a balancing point. China is still a very young form of government, and there is a need to have a unified front and to make sure that the transitions are smooth. It's as Professor Watanabe said, 50 years on, things will be different.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your participation in this meaningful dialogue, if not a debate. For years, the yellow light has represented a bit of a gray area where people seek the maximum flexibility in terms of adhering to the traffic regulation. But these traffic rules have now been set out more rigidly, placing all of us under a legal duty, violation of which makes us liable to prosecution. China has to follow the rules. This is not a quote from President Obama's presidential debate, but a statement of China's intention to construct a civil society and make all citizens responsible stakeholders. I'm Yang Rui, and see you next time. Bye for now.
Points. Speeding, 6 points. Obscuring a license plate, 12 points. And when you lose all 12 points, you have to retake the license test before you can get back behind the wheel. Well, it might be true that this new traffic law is going too far. For many offenses, you won't even have a second chance before they take away your driving license. But lawmakers say there is no second chance when a seemingly minor offense is causing deadly traffic accidents. Across China, more than 60,000 people die in car crashes each year. That means every 10 minutes, one person gets killed on road. The so-called minor violations, such as running red lights or speeding, are the top killers. The government hopes the strict penalties will help deter violations.
I'm Yang Rui, coming to you live from Beijing. China's revised traffic regulations stirred national debate before going into effect last Tuesday. They are believed to be the most stringent traffic regulations to have been introduced in the country ever. The Ministry of Public Security says the amended laws are intended to create a civilized driving environment. But netizens argue that yellow lights lose their meaning as a warning to drivers if jumping a yellow light is punishable in the same way as jumping a red light. So how are China's drivers reacting to these harsher penalties?
Make China's roads safer. But many people say what's really needed is genuine public awareness of traffic safety. Han Peng, CCTV, Beijing.
Welcome back. Look at those brutal pictures in the background of footage. Now, what do you think of the outrage online from the angry drivers that running a yellow light is considered equivalent to running a red light? I mean, there's no meaning at all, as I said earlier in the opening remarks. What do you think of the heavier penalties?
I think they have a reason to be angry. To qualify me as a discussion of this topic, I have 40 years plus experience driving in the United States, also some experience in China. I believe If there's a yellow light existing in the state started 19...
Will the new regulations help improve the driving experience on China's roads? Today, we are happy to be joined here in the Beijing studio by Mr. Gregory Zhang, current affairs commentator, and Mr. Anna Tangen, Biz Times columnist. We'll also talk to Professor Takasato Watanabe from Doshita University, Kyoto, on the phone to hear about Japan's experience with enforcing traffic rules. But before we start the interview, let's look at this.
China's new traffic law is considered to be the strictest ever. Now, even minor offenses can lead to a stiff penalty, including the immediate confiscation of your driver's license. Running a red or yellow light means 6 points deducted from your license. That's half of the 12-point limit. It used to be only 3 points for the same offense. An unfastened seatbelt, 2 points.
20, almost 100 years now. It has a reason. It means only two things. One is to slow down, caution. You can stop your car safely, do it. If not, go through the intersection in ample time, because always 2 or 5 seconds to do that. So this decision making by the government is hasty. It is not reasonable. It cannot be enforced. Something has to be done to change it before it's too late.
Anna, do you defend the government in China, or do you see eye to eye with Anna? Gregory?
I'm going to have to disagree with my learned colleague here. I have 36 years driving experience, not quite 40. But I can tell you, with 62,000 deaths, with 20 million cars being added, with the average experience of Chinese drivers only being 3 years or less, this is a big problem. I think the government is trying to get people's attention. In the past, they have talked about